He stood in our kitchen like a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce." Richard said it so casually, like he was reminding me to take the chicken out of the freezer. 20 years of marriage, 2 grown children, 1 mortgage we had nearly finished paying, and that was how he ended it. "I can't even look at you anymore, Ellen." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. I was standing at the sink, my hands still wet from washing the dinner dishes. Outside, the Ohio rain tapped softly against the windows, and the yellow porch light reflected across the wet driveway. It should have felt like an ordinary Tuesday night. Instead, it felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I turned slowly and looked at the man I had spent half my life protecting. Richard crossed his arms like he had practiced this speech in the mirror. "This marriage has been over for years. We both know it. Let's not make this ugly." "Not make it ugly?" I almost laughed. Because ugly had started a long time ago, long before tonight, long before the lies, before the hotel receipts, before the perfume that wasn't mine on his shirts. But I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply dried my hands on a kitchen towel, walked past him without a word, and opened the hallway closet. Behind the winter coats, under an old box of Christmas decorations, sat a worn blue folder. I pulled it out carefully. When I turned around holding it, something changed in Richard's face. Confusion first, then recognition, then fear. Real fear. His jaw tightened. "What is that?" I walked back to the kitchen table and placed the folder down between us like a final card in a game he thought he had already won. "This," I said quietly, "is the reason you should be very careful about what happens tomorrow." For the first time in years, my husband looked nervous. And that was the moment I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I hadn't wasted 6 months collecting proof for nothing. Because guilty men always recognize evidence. My name is Ellen Parker. I'm 62 years old, and until 6 months ago I thought I was living the kind of life people envied. We lived in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio. Not fancy, but good. Tree-lined streets, church on Sundays, neighbors who waved, grandkids visiting on holidays. The kind of place where people still brought casseroles when someone died. Richard and I had what looked like a solid marriage. He worked in commercial insurance for most of his life. I worked as a school administrative assistant until retirement. We weren't rich, but we were stable. Our house was nearly paid off. Our kids were grown. We had the kind of life people call blessed. At least that's how it looked from the outside. But marriages don't break all at once. They crack quietly. At first it was little things. Richard stopped asking how my day was. Then he stopped listening when I answered. He became impatient with small things, how I folded towels, how I seasoned food, how I reminded him about doctor appointments. He started sighing when I entered a room like my presence itself exhausted him. I told myself it was stress. Men his age go through things people said, retirement anxiety, pride, fear of getting older. I made excuses because love often sounds like patience when it should sound like boundaries. Then came the money. One afternoon I was balancing our monthly expenses at the dining room table when I noticed a transfer from our joint account, $3,000, to an account I didn't recognize. At first I assumed it was business-related. I asked him casually over dinner, "Oh, that investment thing, don't worry about it." He barely looked up from his plate. I should have pushed harder. But after 20 years of marriage, you get trained to swallow your own instincts. Then there were more transfers. 2,000. 1,500. 4,000. Each one followed by the same answer. Don't worry about it. And then came the phone calls. Late at night, he would step outside onto the back porch speaking in a low voice. If I walked near the sliding door, he'd end the call immediately. I started noticing details I had ignored before. A new cologne. A shirt pressed too carefully for just lunch with the guys. A restaurant charge from a place we hadn't been to together in years. Then one Friday afternoon, while putting his receipts into the tax file, I found it. A printed receipt from a lakeside hotel 2 towns over. Dinner for 2. Champagne. 1 overnight stay. And written at the bottom in blue pen was a name. Diane. I stared at that receipt so long my coffee went cold beside me. It felt ridiculous, almost childish, that one name on cheap paper could make 20 years of marriage suddenly rearrange itself in your mind. Every late night. Every cold silence. Every cruel little joke. It all started making sense. I sat there in my kitchen holding that receipt and realized something terrifying. I did not know my own husband anymore. But I also realized something else. If he was lying, I needed facts, not tears. So I bought the blue folder. I didn't tell anyone. Not my daughter, not my church friends, not even my best friend Margaret, not yet. I just started collecting. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, copies of house documents, retirement account summaries, every suspicious little breadcrumb. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted the truth. And deep down, some quiet part of me already knew. One day I was going to need it. I just didn't know that day would arrive, standing barefoot in my kitchen with my husband telling me he couldn't bear to look at me anymore. And now, as Richard stared at that blue folder on the table, pale and silent, I finally understood something important. He thought I was the woman who would cry. He had no idea I was the woman who kept records. Before that blue folder ever existed, I had been the kind of wife people praised. "You're a good woman," Ellen neighbors would say when they saw me carrying groceries into the house, while Richard sat in his recliner with the football game on. "You're patient," ladies from church told me whenever Richard made one of his little jokes at my expense. I used to take those words as compliments. Now looking back, I wonder how many times people call a woman patient, when what they really mean is that she has learned how to disappear without making anyone uncomfortable. Richard and I met when I was 42. I was already divorced, already careful, already old enough to know that fairy tales were mostly sold to young girls who hadn't had to pay electric bills yet. He was charming in that easy Midwestern way, friendly smile, steady job, clean shirt, good manners around my mother. He had 2 children from his first marriage, both teenagers when we met. His son Brian was angry at the world. His daughter Claire barely spoke to me for the first year. I didn't push, I cooked. I remembered birthdays. I drove them to dentist appointments when Richard had meetings. I sat in the bleachers at basketball games even when Claire looked past me like I was part of the wall. Love, I believed, was proven quietly. When Richard lost his job in 2009 after his company downsized, I was the one who told him we would survive. I picked up extra hours at the school office. I clipped coupons. I sold my mother's old china set to cover a car repair and told him I had found a little savings. When he had knee surgery, I slept in the recliner beside him for 3 nights because he was afraid he might fall going to the bathroom. When his mother Ruth became too frail to live alone, I was the one who organized her pills, cooked low-sodium meals, and changed the sheets after accidents she was too embarrassed to mention. Richard cried the night his mother died. He held my hand in the hospital parking lot and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." For years I carried that sentence like a wedding ring inside my heart. I don't know what I'd do without you. But somewhere along the way, gratitude turned into expectation. Then expectation turned into entitlement. The man who once thanked me for packing his lunch started complaining if the mustard was the wrong kind. The man who once called me beautiful in a grocery store aisle began pointing out women on television and saying, "Now that's what taking care of yourself looks like." At first he said it with a laugh. So I laughed too. That is one of the first ways women betray themselves. We laugh so the room doesn't have to feel the cruelty. At a 4th of July cookout 2 summers before everything fell apart, Richard told our friends, "After 20 years, marriage is less romance and more maintenance." Everyone chuckled. Then he looked straight at me and added, "Some things need more maintenance than others." The men laughed louder. The women looked down at their plates. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do with all that humiliation in front of potato salad and paper flags. On the drive home, I said, "That hurt my feelings." Richard sighed like I had asked him to build a house by morning. "Oh, Ellen, don't be so sensitive. It was a joke." A joke. That word became his favorite hiding place. If I was hurt, it was a joke. If I was angry, I was dramatic. If I asked questions, I was suspicious. And if I stayed quiet, he called that peace. The money started becoming strange around the same time his comments became meaner. Richard had always handled the bigger financial decisions while I handled the monthly bills. That was how many couples our age did things. He talked about investments, insurance, retirement plans. I handled groceries, utilities, doctor copays, birthday gifts for grandchildren. It seemed practical. Until I realized practical can become dangerous when only one person has the full map. The first unexplained transfer shook me. The second worried me. By the 5th, I knew something was wrong. Still, I didn't want to believe the worst. At night, I would lie beside Richard, listening to him breathe, remembering the man who cried for his mother and held my hand like I was the only steady thing left in his world. I kept asking myself the same question. How can someone need you so deeply once then look at you later like you are a burden? The answer came slowly and painfully. Some people don't love the person who carries them. They love being carried. When I finally called Margaret, my closest friend from my school office days, I was sitting in the Walmart parking lot with bank statements folded inside my purse. Margaret had worked as a legal secretary for 35 years before retiring, and she had the kind of calm voice that made panic feel unnecessary. "Don't accuse him yet," she said after I told her about the transfers and the hotel receipt. My hands tightened around the phone. "So I should just sit here and let him lie?" "No," she said. "You should get organized." That word changed everything. Organized. Not hysterical. Not vengeful. Not broken. Organized. Margaret told me to make copies of everything. Not just receipts, but property records, inheritance documents, mortgage history, tax returns, retirement statements. She told me to keep them somewhere safe and not leave the only proof in the house. "Ellen," she said gently, "men who plan quietly count on women reacting emotionally. Don't give him that advantage." So I didn't. I bought a blue folder from a dollar store and began building my quiet little wall of truth. Every paper I added felt like reclaiming 1 inch of myself. I still cooked dinner. I still went to church. I still smiled when neighbors waved. But inside I was changing. For 20 years I had been invisible. Now, piece by piece, I was becoming undeniable. The first time I saw Diane, she was standing in my living room complimenting the crown molding. I remember that detail because she said it twice. "This crown molding is gorgeous," she told Richard, running one manicured finger along the wall like she already owned it. "Houses with character are so hard to find now." Richard smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not polite. Not friendly. Proud. Like a boy showing off a prize. He had told me a real estate agent was coming by to give us a casual valuation of the house. "Nothing serious," he said. "Just good to know what the market looked like." That was how Richard always introduced danger wrapped in something reasonable. Diane was younger than me by at least 14 years, maybe more. She had smooth blonde hair, expensive boots, and a laugh that arrived half a second too late, as if she had practiced making men feel interesting. When Richard introduced us, she looked me up and down so quickly most people might have missed it. I didn't. Women my age have spent a lifetime being measured by other women in silence. "Ellen," she said, smiling brightly, "Richard has told me so much about you." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Not nice things. Not wonderful things. Just so much. I offered coffee. She declined. Richard gave her a tour of our home like I was not the person who had scrubbed crayon off those hallway walls, planted the hydrangeas out front, and paid for half the new roof with money from my own retirement account. When they reached the kitchen, Diane glanced at our old oak cabinets and said, "With the right staging, this place could really appeal to a younger couple." A younger couple. I stood at the counter, stirring sugar into coffee I suddenly didn't want, and for the first time I understood this wasn't just about an affair. This was about replacement. After she left, Richard acted too casual. "Diane thinks the house could sell high," he said, opening the refrigerator. I watched him take out a bottle of sparkling water he had suddenly started drinking because Diane probably did. "And why are we talking about selling?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "We're not," I said, "it's just information." But by then I had learned something important. When Richard said just, it usually meant more than "I want you to know." 2 days later I found the second hotel receipt. This one was tucked behind old gas receipts in the glove compartment of his truck. Same lakeside hotel, same restaurant, same 2 glasses of champagne. I took a picture with my phone, then put it back exactly where I found it. That was the part that surprised me most about betrayal. The discipline it required. In movies, women throw clothes out windows, they scream in restaurants, they slap faces and make scenes. But real life at 62 is different. You think about health insurance. You think about property taxes. You think about whether your Social Security will stretch far enough if the person beside you has been planning your financial disappearance. So I did not scream. I drove to Margaret's house. She opened the door before I even knocked twice. "Come in, honey." I sat at her kitchen table, the same place where we had once eaten lemon bars and complained about school board meetings. I laid out copies of the bank transfers, the hotel receipts, and the property documents from when we bought the house. Margaret put on her reading glasses. For several minutes she said nothing. That frightened me more than if she had gasped. Finally she tapped one paper with her finger. Your father's inheritance paid the down payment. Yes. How much? $68,000. And is that documented? I pulled another sheet from my purse. Her eyes lifted to mine. Good girl. Those 2 words almost broke me. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were kind. I hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone looked at me like I had done something right. Margaret gave me the name of an attorney named Paul Harris. Not flashy, she said. Not cheap either, but honest and thorough. Call him, she told me, before Richard knows you know. The following Thursday, I sat across from Mr. Harris in a small office that smelled faintly of paper coffee and old wood. He was around 70 with silver hair, and the calm expression of a man who had watched many people confuse emotion with strategy. I told him everything. Not perfectly. My voice shook. I cried once, then apologized. He handed me a tissue and said, Mrs. Parker, you don't need to apologize for having a human response to betrayal. That sentence stayed with me. Then he reviewed the folder. Page by page, his expression grew more serious. These records matter, he said, especially the inheritance trail and the unexplained transfers. So I'm not overreacting. He looked at me over his glasses. No, you are underprotected. Underprotected. That word felt like a diagnosis. Mr. Harris explained that after long marriages, some spouses get blindsided because they trust memory promises and habit. But courts look at documentation, dates, payments, ownership, patterns. Truth is important, he said, but provable truth is what protects you. By the time I left his office, I felt sadder than when I walked in, but stronger too. Because now I knew Richard wasn't simply bored. He was preparing. And so was I. That evening, he came home smelling like Diane's sharp floral perfume and kissed my cheek like an actor playing a husband in a scene he wanted to finish quickly. After dinner, he said, I think we should talk soon about simplifying things. I folded my napkin slowly. Simplifying what? Our life, the house, money, expectations. There it was. The soft beginning of a hard plan. I looked at him across the table, this man who thought silence meant ignorance, and asked one calm question. Richard, did you already decide what you were going to do with my father's money? His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For 1 second, all the performance drained from his face. Then he recovered. What are you talking about? But I had seen it. That little flash of panic. And once you see the mask slip, you can never unsee the person underneath. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my marriage. Richard became almost polite. Not loving. Polite. He carried his own coffee cup to the sink. He asked whether I needed anything from the grocery store. He even complimented a pot roast I made on a Sunday evening, though he said it like a man reading from a card. That was how I knew he was afraid. Not sorry. Afraid. There is a difference, and women my age learn it late, but we learn it well. Sorry looks inward. Afraid looks for exits. Richard was looking for exits. He started spending more time in the garage with his laptop. He changed passwords. He took phone calls in the driveway with the truck door closed. Once at 2 a.m, I woke up and saw the blue glow of his phone reflecting on the bedroom wall. He thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I had become very good at pretending. That was the hardest part, living beside someone while knowing he was planning a version of the future where you were simply removed. Like an old sofa. Like expired milk. Like something useful once but inconvenient now. 2 days before he made his final announcement, I found a draft email open on our shared printer tray. Richard had always been careless with technology. He thought deleting something from his phone meant it disappeared from the world, but he forgot the printer kept a queue, and he forgot I was the one who fixed things every time his stupid machine stopped working. The email was addressed to Diane. It was not long. Once Ellen signs, we can move forward. Harrisburg property is still available. Florida might need to wait until spring. Don't worry, she won't fight. She doesn't have the stomach for it. I stood in the little office room holding that paper while the morning sun came through the blinds in thin, bright stripes. She won't fight. That sentence did something to me. Not because it hurt. Because it clarified. For months I had wondered whether I was being too suspicious, too guarded, too cold. But there it was in black and white. Richard was not confused. He was not going through a phase. He was counting on my softness. He had mistaken kindness for surrender. I folded the email, added a copy to the blue folder, and drove to Mr. Harris's office. He read it once. Then he read it again. Well, he said removing his glasses, that tells us quite a bit about intent. What happens now? Now he said you let him speak first. So I did. 2 nights later, Richard stood in our kitchen and performed the speech he had rehearsed. Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce. I can't even look at you anymore. Let's not make this ugly. And I stood there with wet hands and a broken heart, realizing grief can exist right beside power. I was devastated. But I was not helpless. When I pulled the blue folder from the closet and placed it on the kitchen table, Richard's confidence began draining out of him like water from a cracked bucket. "What is that?" he asked. I opened it. The first page was the down payment record from when we bought the house. "This is the wire transfer from my father's estate," I said. $68,000. It went directly toward this home. His mouth tightened. That was 20 years ago. "Yes," I said, "and paper remembers what people forget." I placed the mortgage statements beside it. "These show payments from my income during the years you were unemployed." He looked toward the hallway, then back at me. "Ellen, this is ridiculous." I added the bank transfers. 3,000, 2,000, 1,500, 4,000. All moved from our joint account into one I never agreed to. His face reddened. "That money was mine too." "Then you should have had no problem telling me where it went." He slapped his hand on the table hard enough to make the salt shaker jump. "Don't start acting like some attorney. You don't know what you're talking about." I did not flinch. That was new for me. For years, a sharp tone from Richard could make me shrink. That night, it only made me still. Then I placed the hotel receipts on the table. 1. Then the second. Then the printed email to Diane. Richard stared at it. All the color left his face. There it was, the pale expression from my memory, the one that told me he understood exactly what I had. He reached for the email. I put my hand on top of it. "Number." His eyes snapped to mine. "No," he repeated like the word was foreign coming from my mouth. "No," I said again. "These are copies. The originals are safe." That was the moment he truly panicked. "Ellen, listen to me. Funny how men ask women to listen only after ignoring them for years." "I made mistakes," he said, lowering his voice. "But you don't want to drag our private life through court. Think about the kids. Think about our reputation." "Our reputation?" I asked. My voice stayed calm, but something inside me burned clean and bright. "You were not thinking about our reputation at the Lakeside Hotel." He looked away. I had never seen Richard look small before. The next morning we sat in Mr. Harris's office. Richard brought his own attorney, a younger man with polished shoes, and the impatient confidence of someone who thought this would be a simple meeting. It was not. Mr. Harris laid out the documents slowly, almost gently. The inheritance trail. The mortgage history. The suspicious transfers. The evidence that Richard had discussed moving forward with another woman before even filing. Richard's attorney stopped smiling after page 3. By page 7, he was whispering to Richard in a tone I recognized immediately. "Damage control." Richard avoided my eyes the entire time. A week later, Diane vanished from the story as quickly as she had entered it. Margaret heard from someone at church that Diane had stopped showing the Harrisburg property and taken a personal break. I suppose romance feels different when the money comes with legal complications. Richard called me 3 times that first week after he moved into a short-term apartment. I answered once. His voice sounded older. "I didn't think you'd actually do this," he said. "That's the problem, Richard," I replied. "You never thought I would do anything." He was quiet. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. "Is there any way to fix this?" I looked around our kitchen, our quiet old kitchen with rain marks still drying on the window from another Ohio storm. "There is no fixing what you tried to bury," I said. "If anything is rebuilt, it starts with the truth." For once, Richard had nothing clever to say. And for once, I did not rush to fill the silence for him. For the first month after Richard moved out, the house sounded different. Not peaceful exactly. Just honest. There were no footsteps pacing in the hallway during secret phone calls, no refrigerator door opening at midnight after he came home late and pretended he had been with the guys. No sigh from the living room when I asked a simple question. At first the quiet scared me. Then slowly it began to heal me. I started doing small things that had no connection to Richard at all. I painted the guest bathroom pale green because I liked it. I bought the good coffee instead of the cheap brand he preferred. I moved my reading chair closer to the front window where the morning light came in. These were not dramatic acts. No one would make a movie about a 62-year-old woman buying herself flowers at Kroger on a Wednesday afternoon. But to me, each little choice felt like proof that I still existed. Mr. Harris handled the legal side carefully. Richard did not get to rush me into signing anything. He did not get to pretend the house had been built only by his money. He did not get to hide behind charm, anger, or embarrassment. The folder had done what it was meant to do. It protected the truth. But protection is not the same as healing. That part was harder. Some mornings I woke up angry enough to shake. Other mornings I missed the man Richard used to be so badly I hated myself for it. Betrayal is strange that way. You can know someone hurt you and still grieve the version of them you loved. Margaret reminded me of that over coffee one afternoon. Missing him doesn't mean you're weak, she said. It means the good years were real too. That helped. Because they were real. The hospital parking lot when he held my hand after his mother died, that was real. The winter he shoveled our neighbor's driveway because Mr. Jenkins had pneumonia, that was real too. The man who betrayed me existed. But so did the man who once loved me. The painful part was accepting that one truth did not erase the other. Richard began counseling in the second month. I did not ask him to. I did not beg him. I did not offer it as a condition to save our marriage. He called one evening and said I started seeing someone, a counselor. I waited. Then he added, I've been telling myself a lot of stories, Ellen. That was the first sentence from him that sounded less like fear and more like responsibility. Over time, his apologies changed. At first, they were full of explanations. I felt old. I felt trapped. I didn't know how to talk to you. I was scared of becoming invisible. I listened, but I did not rescue him from his own discomfort. Finally, one afternoon, sitting across from me on the porch with his hands folded between his knees, Richard said the words I had needed for months. I lied. I cheated. I tried to take what wasn't mine, and I treated you like you were disposable because I was too selfish to face myself. I looked at him then. Really looked. He seemed smaller, but not in the cruel way I had once wanted. He seemed human, ashamed, awake. I don't know if I can forgive you the way you want, I said. He nodded. I know. And if we ever try again, it won't be the old marriage. I know that too. It took 6 months before I agreed to regular dinners. Not moving back in. Not pretending. Just dinners. We met every Thursday at a small diner near the courthouse, the kind of place where the waitress knows who wants decaf and who still orders pie after saying they are full. We talked about things we should have talked about years earlier: money, loneliness, pride, aging, fear, resentment. Some conversations ended in tears, some ended in silence, but none ended in lies. Eventually we made rules, separate accounts, full financial transparency, counseling, no secrets hidden behind don't worry about it, and respect not as a gift but as a requirement. People sometimes ask if I got revenge. I suppose I did. But not the kind people imagine. I did not destroy Richard. I did not scream in Diane's driveway or embarrass him at church. I did not turn our children against him, though I told them the truth in a way they were old enough to understand. My revenge was quieter. I stopped disappearing. I stood in my own kitchen with proof in my hands and refused to be rewritten as a foolish old woman who would sign away her life because someone told her to be nice. That blue folder saved my house. But more than that, it saved my self-respect. And if there is one thing I want every woman and every man listening to remember, especially those of us who have lived long enough to know that love can be complicated, it is this. Trust is beautiful, but blindness is dangerous. Know your finances. Keep your records. Understand what you own. Ask questions even when someone makes you feel guilty for asking. And never let 20 years of loyalty convince you that you no longer have the right to protect yourself. Richard and I are still rebuilding. Slowly. Carefully. Some evenings we sit together on the porch and watch the sun go down behind the maple trees. We are not the same couple we were before. We never will be. Maybe that is the point. Reconciliation does not mean returning to the place where you were hurt. It means building something new where truth is allowed to live. And forgiveness without accountability is not love. It is surrender. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had to stand up for yourself after years of staying silent? Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you believe stories like this can remind us of our worth, our wisdom, and our strength, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and stayed with us for the next one. The end.